the secular realm has been asking from time beginning in all of this UFO research is, why do these people have the abduction experience? They have no answer for that. But we did find an answer. We actually found 3 answers, and it can be one of 3 ways that this happens to a person. One, you could openly ask for it. And believe me, there's people that do that. I go to these UFO conferences, and there's people that are saying, man, I'd love to have that experience to see what it is. You need to be careful what you ask for. You know, it's hard to believe people do that, but they do. They see these shows on TV, and they're enticed by them, and they want to experience it themselves. Be careful what you ask for. The second one we came across was people that said they had never done that, but yet they were still having the experience. And then we started looking into what they were doing and how they were living their lives, and we found that there were a lot of ungodly doors that were open that were allowing this experience to happen, allowing the entities behind the experience to mess with their lives. And that's an open door. The one that puzzled us the most was when we had adults coming to us and said, well, I've had this experience since I was a child. I remember having this experience at 5 and 6 and 7 years old. Well, that puzzled us at first, because how could that person at that age openly ask for it? They didn't. They didn't even know about this phenomenon. And did they unknowingly open any doors? Well, they're pretty innocent at that age. So that puzzled us and made us start looking at what else could be causing this at that age. Well, we started asking them about their family life, and we found open doors in the family life. And the parents were into bizarre things and ungodly things. And that, looking in Scripture, remember, Scripture tells us that the head of the household is the spiritual covering of that household. Well, they didn't have their head of the household as a spiritual covering. And if they don't have that spiritual covering, then that family is open to all sorts of influence, demonic influence. So it's very careful that the head of the household puts that spiritual covering over their family, because then their family's protected. If you don't do that, your family's left wide open.
So it's just like it's just like a father that had to put the blood on the doorpost and the lintel to protect his eldest son when Passover occurred.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why it's so important. You know, in biblical theology, the man is the head of the household and the spiritual head of the household, and he needs to take that place. And a lot of times we don't see that in this society. It's becoming less and less, and that's a lot of because of what the secular realm is doing, you know, trying to put the man not on the pedestal that God had put him on, and trying to, the whole thing with women's rights and equality and all of that stuff, it kind of degrades the man and puts him in a lesser position than what he was actually initiated to be from the beginning. And that's something that needs to be taken back.
And we see examples in Scripture with gentlemen like Eli, who didn't take that position with his sons, and they sinned greatly, or King David, who left an opening that afflicted his entire family afterwards because of his own weakness of leadership.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. So we're able to go back and see how this experience came into these people's lives. And it was always through some type of doorway that was opened, whether unknowingly, whether you actually asked for it, or whether you had that door opened for you, you know, when you were younger. And this is something that needs to be closed, you know, to be able to halt this experience.
Wow. So before we rudely interrupted you, you were going to explain about searching in the Bible for answers. What did the Bible show you to try to explain this mysterious activity?
Well, the one thing that I knew had to be in Scripture, if this was all seemingly to be based from the Scripture, the one piece that seemed to be missing is, where is that Scripture that would explain how these people are able to stop this experience? And I started out with Ephesians 6:12, which explains who these entities are. There's a hierarchy in the demonic realm, and these entities are part of that hierarchy. They're not flesh and blood. They're spiritual entities, and they're the ones that are harassing people with this experience. And this experience is just a part of a major deception.
So you don't mince words. You immediately went to the understanding that their behavior replicated what you saw in Scripture, that was according to the kind of behavior of demonic beings and what their motives were in Scripture. That there's an overlap. What were the kind of things they did that made you think, this is the same kind of actions we see in Scripture?
Well, Ephesians 6:12 talks about a hierarchy of the demonic realm. And what we were seeing and understanding what demons and angels are is we understand what demons are and how they work. We see they constantly want to have a possession of a person or a physical being. We don't see that with these UFO entities. We see something entirely different. Possession is not something that comes up in the UFO realm. It's a demonic influence. Well, that takes it into a different part of that hierarchy of the demonic realm. And what part is that? Well, when you start looking at the abilities that are described of these particular UFO alien entities, it's very angelic in nature.
Mm.
What you see in Scripture, the ability of God's angels through Scripture, how they're able to come into the flesh and appear as human beings, and they can eat, and everybody assumes that they're human, but they're angels. Lot in his family was a prime example.
Right.
They have that ability. We've also seen how they have the ability to pass through something or change appearance. This is an angelic ability. Well, we know that in Scripture they talk of fallen angels. A third of the host of heaven fell with Lucifer. Those are angelic beings. And what we feel that we're dealing with here in the UFO realm with these alien entities are demonic fallen angels. Their abilities are angelic in nature. It's not a technology which the secular realm mistakes it for, and that's something that I bring up in my talks. What we're seeing here is not high technology. What we're seeing here is just these entities' abilities to do what they do. But the secular realm doesn't want to accept that, because to accept that comes consequences of believing that God is real, the Bible's real, and all of that.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In Genesis 6, isn't that sort of a classic discussion of a modus operandi of these fallen angels that is very similar probably to what you see in these abduction events?
Yes. I don't deal too much with Genesis 6, but I understand all about it and the writings that have been done on it. And a lot of the researchers feel that that's where a lot of this came from. They actually show the abilities there in Genesis 6:4. And a lot of them feel that this is continuing here at the end, the same types of shenanigans, should I say, that they were doing then before the flood.
Reproductive experiments, in other words. They were doing reproductive activities. Some of our newer listeners, the Bible gives indication, if you study the Hebrew very carefully, that there were sexual unions going on, that there are reproductive type events. If you go to other supportive scriptures like the Book of Enoch, which was with the Dead Sea Scrolls, another ancient book that was used alongside the canon with our forefathers, it goes into greater detail about these kind of experiments. It just sounds very, very much like the reports of aliens today, of their interest in our whole reproductive cycle and our DNA, and basically doing these experiments without our approval or authorization.
Yes, and that is a lot of what Dr. David Jacobs looks at, is the whole hybridization, they call it. That's the term, where they're trying to create a hybrid race of beings. Now, in my research, and I know I will catch a lot of flack from my fellow researchers, you have to show me some of this,
right,
or we don't have the evidence. And the one thing that I will keep it open, that it is a possibility that there is something going on in this manner, but I have yet to see the evidence. And I don't think that it actually has to happen for this to serve its purpose. Remember,
Sure.
We're dealing with deception. And in something I see, being that most of the people that have the abduction experience are women, it's a control factor involved with the abduction experience. There's a brainwashing involved. The term for the CE4 experience, Close Encounter to Fourth Kind, by Jack Valet, is reality transformation. And that's what we're seeing that's happening to these people. The whole purpose is to change their reality and change what they actually believe. And it's done through a brainwashing, and it's done through a control method. And part of that control method is this so-called belief in a hybridization going on. Does it really need to actually happen? No. Because if you just let that woman believe that they've used